Good afternoon. This is a very interesting day here in the state of Minnesota as we heard this preliminary and the budget forecast. And I want to thank MMB for doing their work and getting these numbers out. As you well know, February will give us that actual snapshot. But the results that we saw with this budget forecast that came out today is exactly what House Republicans have been warning for the last 2 years would be the case. Not only did we warn this, but we know that MMB had also urged the legislature to use caution in any future decisions. But here we are with a looming deficit. Democrats ignored those warnings from Republicans. They ignored the warnings from their own party's administration. And now, again, we have that looming $5 billion deficit projected just a few short years. Instead of listening to those warnings, Democrats went on that spending spree, spending our $18 billion surplus. And instead of sending it back to overtaxed Minnesotans in the way of tax relief or other methods. We also know that that wasn't enough for a full one-party Democrat control in the state of Minnesota. They chose to raise the state budget by taxing Minnesotans and adding on fees another $10 billion. We know those fees were the delivery tax fees, the metro area sales tax, tab fees. Again, as we can't forget, that project over at the state office building, another almost $1 billion. So $730 million for that state office building remodel. We're displaced into empty space right now, but yet we know that is just the floor. That was the kind of spending that we saw one-party Democrat control could do in the state of Minnesota. In addition to that, there was over $1 billion of unaccountable nonprofits that had money spent to it, and we heard questions earlier about what about fraud? We have almost $1 billion in known fraud in the state of Minnesota. Zero accountability within our commissioners and our agencies. Minnesotans, Minnesota taxpayers are tired of funding fraud here in the state of Minnesota. In addition to that, over the last 2 years, there have been an additional 6,000 new government FTEs. There was also free college and health care that was given out. And we know that it's not just the government that is losing money because of these bad decisions over the last 2 years. We know that the labor market is slowing, and that has a huge impact on the state's outlook. So instead of budgeting with Minnesota in mind, Democrats over the last 2 years spent everything that they could that hit Minnesotans hard, yet government in the state of Minnesota received a 40% raise. House Republicans do expect that Democrats will work with us to rein in the state budget so that we can avert this looming budget crisis. Even though it's a few years off, now is the time to actually exercise caution. We have to stop the spending spree. We have to be responsible. House Republican co-chairs already have a plan in place, and the work actually starts now. We will be sending out letters to the agencies asking them a couple of things. We're asking them to detail how many of their positions have been unfilled over time for an extended period of time, how many of those new more than 6,000 FTEs have not even been filled yet. We're also going to be asking how much they're spending on leases, on empty buildings because state employees may be still working from home. We will also be asking for how many DEI employees have been added to every agency across the state. We will expect the agencies, the commissioners, to provide detailed information about every facet of their agency budgets. Given the fact that we have a budget crisis on the horizon, we need to start working now to evaluate efficiency of our state programs and working to root out the hundreds of millions of dollars in fraud that is still likely going on across state government. We know that as Republicans, we can't do this alone, and the state expects better. With a tied House right now, It gives us the perfect opportunity to come together, to work with our Democrat colleagues, to find solutions, to govern responsibly, to rein in the spending, and this has now put us in the position to do the work that Minnesota expects us to do. With that, before I turn it over to colleagues, I will open it up for questions.
Brett, talk about what his caucus is saying, because you had a detailed list. It sounds like you guys are.
We do have a detailed list, yes.
Where's the Senate Republican caucus?
Sure, and I will turn that
over.
over, and I failed to introduce myself as we have that tie in the House right now. The current title is I am the House Republican Co-Speaker Designate, and that work is still going on, and I will turn it over to my colleagues to add more.
Well, thank you, Madam Co-Speaker Designate. It's long. It's concerning. It's concerning that we saw a budget surplus drop 65% in just 6 months. 65% in just 6 months. We, the short-term surplus that and balance that we saw in the budget was really driven by the existing surplus. We've talked about the fact that they've already spent 15 of the $18 billion surplus and more to come. But the spending that was passed over the last 2 years, as the forecast shows, is just unsustainable. It's unsustainable for Minnesotan families. We are number 46 when it comes to state and local tax burden on across the country. Minnesota families can't afford this anymore. We had an $18 billion surplus, and they got virtually nothing back. And so, we're going to say the word that the governor and the Democrat leadership won't say. We're going to say that we are facing a deficit. We're facing a massive deficit. And education and healthcare are a big part of that, but it's half of the change that we saw presented today. And we still have another $500 million that's being impacted. I agree with the co-speaker designate in that we need to focus first and foremost on waste, fraud, and abuse. The governor and his commissioners have failed to take seriously the recommendations of the Office of Legislative Auditor. They've been pushing back on those. And so that's a great place to start. As we said, there are hundreds of millions of dollars in savings to Minnesota families, just if we are able to put the right controls in place. But I'll tell you, from the Senate perspective, we're still focused on making sure that Minnesota, we heard Minnesotans say they need help with their family budgets, and we're going to be putting their family budgets ahead of some of the other requests that come in.
Long-term care, obviously you heard all the Democrats say it's the biggest part of the budget, most difficult part. That's something Senate Republicans have kind of fought for, increasing funding. Are cuts coming? Will you defend cuts for long-term care?
We haven't had a chance to really discuss that in detail. What I can say is that our aging population is putting more and more pressure on long-term care facilities, and those are particularly important to many of our communities in greater Minnesota. We don't want to leave our seniors out in the cold, but we also have to look at the $1 billion in fraud that has been going on and that has been identified. We've got to talk about the impacts that we have in continuing to tax Minnesotans to the point that we are one of the 4th or 5th worst states from state and local impact. We got to look at the mandates that we passed. It was interesting that the governor talked about Medicare, or the federal mandates on health care and special education, but Democrats were silent on the concerns that we heard from local governments and our school districts when we passed state mandates onto them. And now we're seeing property taxes go up and many school districts having to cut their budgets. So, everybody said, we've got a lot of work to do, but we do, in fact, have to look at the 28-29 budget cycle. We can't say we're just, as my colleague said before, we can't just look at balancing this 2-year cycle. We do a 4-year cycle just for that very reason, so that we're not scrambling and that we're very thoughtful and planful about how we address future budgets.
Do you agree that tax increases and spending cuts all need to be on the table, or does it all need to be on the spending side?
I just don't know how we can ask Minnesotans to spend more. You know, we just had Democrats in charge of the entire state government, and they raised taxes $10 billion. And in spite of a $10 billion increase in taxes, we're still facing a $5 billion deficit. How much more can we ask Minnesotans to pay? We have to take a look at the spending and the decisions that were made by Democrats on party line votes over the last 2 years.
So no taxes, Representative Naaman?
We're going to be looking at everything, but as you have heard, the increase to taxes and fees on Minnesotans already was too much. Minnesota does not have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem, and that is resounding loudly. We have to control the spending, get rid of the fraud, ask those agencies for accountability. If dollars are going into those agencies that are either being wasted or unused properly, that's where we're going to start doing those reductions and savings. Then we'll talk about it. I do not see any new taxes on the horizon that will hurt Minnesotans. Yes.
Co-speaker designate, sorry.
Sure.
About that. The governor was very adamant. He says we're not going to punish state employees that bring essential services. He mentioned snowplow drivers, which I guess is somewhat appropriate today or will be. So my question of you is, your chamber is going to have the deciding vote on this to say no, okay, in one way or the other, regardless of what happens with that Supreme Court election business. But are you going to say we got that there's no state budget unless we trim all the way across the board in some way, shape, or form?
You know, I think this is going to be a very unique year that we're not going to just say, you know, a reduction all the way across. What we're going to do is we're going to look at every agency, look at where those dollars are being spent. What are we allocating? Are we wasting money? Is there abuse? Is there fraud? Are there savings in one area that we could apply to another area that's shorter? We are going to be looking line by line on this enormous state budget that has grown 40% in the last 2 years under full Democrat control. We will be looking line by line in all of that. The early work that we are asking the agencies to do will help inform those decisions. That is why it is very important, as those letters go out in just a couple of days, that the agencies are responsive in a timely manner, because co-chairs in the House of Representatives, Republican co-chairs, are going to be bringing in an accountability for every single agency, small to large.
When you talk about looking at DEI within agencies, unfilled FTEs, and fraud, do you have any sense of, you know, what % of the deficit that would address?
You know, we don't have any sense right now because we don't have an accounting for that. And that is why we've got to have those numbers to know what the dollars and what the number of people are in those areas. Just because we allocate new FTEs in an agency, we have heard, but we cannot prove this yet, we have heard that sometimes they go unfilled for years. In my mind, if they're unfilled for years, are we shorting the people of Minnesota for the work that needs to be done? Or do we have FTEs unfilled and that money is just sitting with those in those agencies? We've got to have an accountability on it. As soon as we have that, it will address how much of the deficit will need to be handled or could be handled by reducing what is being wasted right now.
When you say DEI employees, do you mean people leading DEI-focused programs? Like, what do you mean by that?
We know that there were a number of new FTEs, and I don't have the number yet, we're waiting on that, for the diversity, equity, and inclusion. We want to make sure that we are treating people right, that we are hiring people because they are able to do the jobs that they're being hired for. But if we have added in additional FTEs, specifically in DEI, across every agency, that should be able to be streamlined. If we're duplicating work, that could be streamlined and reducing the number of FTEs.
Beyond the state budget, the agencies I'm talking about, where do you think there might have to be trimming in the long-term care area? And I realize this is, you know, a couple of budget cycles into the future, but Do you have any thoughts on that now?
We know that our long-term care has faced concerns and shortages over the last 2 years. House Republicans worked very, very hard, along with our Republican colleagues in the Senate in 2023, to secure nursing home funding. In Greater Minnesota specifically, our nursing homes were shutting down. There were not places for people that actually needed that care for loved ones, and that was being shortaged. We were able to secure just $300 million, and that was not a fix, that was a Band-Aid. And then there is continued work going on in that area. The comparison I like to use with that is finally fighting for nursing home coverage a little bit and an increase to get them through. We were able to secure the $300 million, but yet it was without a blink of an eye that Democrats chose to spend $730 million on half a block in St. Paul on the state office building. That is the inequities that we are seeing. We will make sure that we do everything within our power to take care of the most vulnerable in our state in the way that they need to be taken care of, and get rid of the waste in other areas that is absolutely ridiculous.
Whether you take care of that problem with cutting waste in other areas, if the governor says, no, you can't, that there's going to have to ultimately long-term be a conversation about what are we going to do about long-term care waivers that's really driving this whole thing. And I understand you don't want to commit, that far ahead, but do you have any thoughts for Minnesotans on what you might look at to get that under control?
Looking at how we need to help in those areas, we will look at absolutely everything. I think it's kind of disingenuous that our governor would have said that we can't do it. I think we need to look at areas where there's waste and fraud and move it to areas that are most vulnerable. We will look at every possibility of helping specifically the most vulnerable, but all of those core requirements and the core responsibilities of government across the state. We don't just want it focused in one area. We want to make sure that we are meeting the needs of Minnesotans across the state in a fair way.
This is for the senator who just said something I'm confused by. You said that you want to tackle the 28-29 deficit now. You can only do that by working on the 26-27 budget. So walk through the math here. Do you have a target in your mind? Do you want to hit now $5 billion surplus in the 26-27 budget to tackle, as you said, the 28-29 deficit? Is that where the numbers that you're going to be, negotiating with over the next few weeks, few months?
So are we going to be able to tackle the entire $5.2 billion deficit? I don't know. But when we do our budgeting for this, right.
That if you want to tackle 27 or 28-29 now, you can only do that with the current budget. 24-25 is done. 26-27 is on the table. So what is your number? What do you want then in 26-27?
I don't know what that number is. What I'm saying is this was in response to something I believe the other co-speaker designate mentioned, that we will only be looking at the 27-28 biennium. But yet, historically, we've always looked at the impact on the tails when we do the current year budgeting. And to suggest that we kick that can down the road until we get to it is the part that I'm talking about, that we need to start looking at not just balancing this year's budget, but also what are the long-term ramifications of those decisions that we make for this budget cycle.
27 last year.
I'm sorry, what?
You didn't and last year you didn't balance 26-27.
I understand we didn't balance 26-27 and look at the situation we're in today. And we needed to be more cognizant of the impacts on 26-27 when we did the 24, now I've got my years mixed up, 25-26 biennial budget. And I think that goes to some of the misguided decisions that Democrats made when they were putting together that spending plan.
Do you think, given the current trend, that February forecast might wipe out the remaining $616 million surplus?
That's hard to say whether it will or won't. I mean, we do see changes over the years. I don't know what the February forecast is going to be. I think it's going to be pretty close to what we saw today. We might see a little bit of upside. We might see a little bit of downside. The story is that we've we've changed our bottom line balance, dropped 65% in just 6 months. We had a forecast just 6 months ago, and it dropped by 65%. So, Tom, it very well could wipe it out. We could see a little bit of upside, but I think we're going to be pretty close to where, to where we're at today.
Leader, Niska, could you talk about your new members? Because that's part of the reason you're in this co-speaker situation is some of those new members. What kind of appetite do they have for cuts or changes in state government? What are you hearing so far from them?
Well, sure. And my name is Harry Niska. I represent Ramsey and Andover, and I'm the deputy leader of the Minnesota House. First, I want to emphasize, I think, what Speaker Demuth, I think that's easier to say. Speaker Demuth was saying about what this really says from a big picture level, which is the Democrat policies have put Minnesota on an incredibly precarious path long-term. And they can talk today about the drivers that are driving state spending, but those are problems they chose not to address when they had a trifecta and a $17.5 billion surplus. Instead, creating a situation where we're swinging from that kind of a surplus to a $5 billion deficit in 3 budget cycles. So that's what I think our new members are most concerned about is how did that happen? How did one-party Democrat control increase taxes and increase spending in such a way that we have swung from, again, a historic surplus to what looks like now maybe not a historic deficit, but a historic policy-driven deficit. So I don't think there's a lot of appetite from those parts of Minnesota that now elected Republicans after seeing what that Democrat trifecta did. I don't think there's a lot of appetite in those areas for more increased spending, increased taxes, increased regulation, which is kind of what has driven us into this in the first place. I did want to talk a little bit briefly about where we're going in the future, because I think that the decrease in tax revenues really does point to some significant problems in our long-term economy that are created by the Democrat policies as well that are going to potentially make this even worse. We can't continue to spend more money and damage the private economy in our state that pays for that government spending. And that's a big concern that we should all be taking away from this, this budget forecast as well. Not only are the Democrat policies massively exploding the size and scope of government spending and regulation, it's also constricting the private sector, the private economy that we need in order to pay for that. That's the real solution in the long term, is that we have to have a vibrant private economy that's able to pay for services, that's able to pay for special ed, that's able to pay for long-term care. Obviously, we need to deal with the waste and abuse in state government, but the only way to long-term solve those problems is for us to have a healthy, vibrant state economy, and that has been damaged by Democrat policies the last 2 years.
One question for any of you. Did you all believe Governor Walz today when he said that they saw this coming, that they anticipated this deficit?
I'll repeat the question because I know that's not coming through on the streaming, but the question was, did we believe Governor Walz when he said that they saw this coming? I can't speak for Governor Walz, but what I can tell you is House Republicans saw this coming, and we tried to raise the alarm and tried to just draw attention to this is where we are headed. And because even with slim majorities, full one-party Democrat control ignored the voices of conservative Minnesotans and other Minnesotans, and they pushed through partisan priorities and got us to the point that we are right now. So whether or not they knew it was coming, it didn't change what they did, and we are now in a position of a looming deficit. Any other questions for us?
About one of the new programs, paid family leave. I mean, that is one that's projected to add FTEs. Are there any specific proposals short of repeal of that law that you all plan to introduce this session?
The question is the new paid family leave that was put into law by the Democrats over the last 2 years. Right now, there is not a plan to repeal that fully, but yet, we know that it is already, before it is off the ground, it is already in a deficit, and we had to add an additional $700 million to that program last year before it has even started. We will be looking at potential amendments and adjustments made to that program as we go forward, and making sure that Minnesotans know that, yes, we want to take care of our employees, but a tax on every employee or employer, if they choose to then pass it on to their employee, and it is not going to give them their full income. Minnesotans don't know what is in that program right now, and they are sorely going to be disappointed with the way it stands right now. We will be looking at solutions of how that could be improved, more affordable. Right now, if you have one employee, you are forced into a state mandated program. We need to take looks at all of that, and we're willing to do that work.
For a delay in implementation beyond?
I don't know what that will look like. Again, in shared government, I had been talking all on the campaign trail, the need for balance in the state of Minnesota. Well, House Republicans, House Democrats, we are in the perfect balance of 50-50 right now. And so everything that happens in this next legislative session is going to have to be bipartisan, even if that would change with upcoming election contests. Even if that changes, we know that we are still working with a Democrat-controlled Senate and a Democrat governor. So there is balance within, and everything we do will have to be agreed upon. That is better for Minnesotans at this point. Thank you.